Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the recent ICJ judgment as far as Israel is concerned. We've also, of course, know about the arrest warrants that have been issued. The ICC has called for arrest warrants to be issued for the Israeli Prime Minister and Defense Minister along with 3 Hamas leaders. Of course, we've seen the response come from, very little response from some of the countries. We've also seen the current situation in Gaza as far as the International Court of Justice ruling is concerned and its ramifications overall. On the current situation where of course there is continued brutality at play. We'll be talking about this, we'll be talking about the overall situation as women and children continue to die brutally at the hands of Israel and their forces. A little later on we'll also be talking about the use of Afghan soil against Pakistan, the terrorism that is coming from there. We've seen of course, the Interior Minister speak today about the security situation overall, all of that today on Perspective. I have with me Dr. Waqas Ali Kausar, who's an IR expert. Thank you for being with us today. And we also have with us Ayesha Malik, who's Deputy Director, Research Society of International Law. Thank you for joining us. Let me start with you. Ayesha, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Ayesha, overall the situation with regard to this ruling particularly, in a lot of ways it's certainly a hallmark event as far as the ruling is concerned, of course, and also the arrest warrants that have been issued, whatever the actual effect of it may be. But let's talk about what it actually means at this time for the overall situation.
So I think both of these developments and the fact that they're coming in such close proximity to each other are very, very important in terms of galvanizing international support against Israel and against what it's doing, particularly in the case of Rafah. And I think we definitely have South Africa to thank for the ICJ ruling. We know that since January, it had gone back to the court 3 times now to try and get a ceasefire. Finally, the ICJ has decided, with the consensus of many judges, really, we saw that this provisional measures order was given 13 judges to 2, the 2 against being the Israeli judge and the Ugandan judge, saying you have to halt your military offensive in Rafah. Now, the use of the word offensive is quite important there because it says if you do face rocket fire from Hamas, you are, of course, allowed to respond to that in a defensive posture, but you can't continue with your military operation against the civilian population of Rafah, which, I mean, Israel alleges that it's never done, but we know it has been doing in the 7 months of this, as well as the fact that coupled with that, you have ICC arrest warrants now against Benjamin Netanyahu, against Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, alleging that they have carried out war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I think the crux of both of these arguments is going to be, in terms of South Africa's case for genocide at the ICJ, as well as the arrest warrants and the crimes tried at the ICC, will be the starvation of the civilian population as a method of warfare. And that is something that we're seeing Israel refusing to let up on. It is refusing to let in aid. It was ordered now to open the Rafah crossing. It's been ordered to, allow in UN fact-finding missions so that they can investigate allegations of genocide. And yet there's been no let-up for 7 months.
Let me come back to you on that note. I'm going to include Dr. Waqas and then I'll come back to you. Dr. Waqas, you heard what Ayesha Malik is saying. She's saying that, of course, the goal seems to be starvation of the people, the civilians at this time. Do you think this is, of course, it has its ramifications. It's resonating, whether it actually, leads to a let-up for those people or not. But, it certainly is resonating. It is being talked about as far as the media is concerned. Of course, we've also seen the US response, which is very, too little, too late in a lot of sense. And the media has also noticed it. So do you think it's perhaps going to build up? Or do you think that's too perhaps optimistic here?
See, I see in a way that particularly after ICC and then you see in the backdrop of ICJ decision, I mean, it's a world court having its own significance in the international order. Of course, Israel is the signatory to Geneva Convention, and of course the part of it, both South Africa and the Israel as well. I mean, it has its own significance. Of course, I mean, the destruction, the overall I mean, the level of destruction, if we see, that's massive, that's unbelievable. But on the other side, if you see the way it, South Africa, I mean, keep on pushing, and now the court came with a very strict orders, and the language is very, I mean, it's very clear, asking to halt this campaign of military campaign. See, I mean, now there's a pressure building up. If you see the allies of Israel particularly, I mean, it's the space, the political and international space for Israel is squeezing. It's very difficult. It's not tenable that if you keep on refuting the orders of international court, then it affects your democratic stature as well. It of course creates a lot of political and social and other problems as well. Right now, of course, the very core concern is that how to stop, how to send the relief immediately, and how to bring that ceasefire for continued basis. But if you overall see the scenario, I mean, it's very difficult for now Israel. If you see countries like Norway and then EU states, they start accepting Palestine and their right for a state. I mean, this itself an indication that things are moving forward. Of course, there's a big question now for the international bodies, and particularly we know the ICJ has no enforcement arm, I mean, can't, but of course the countries and in particular UNSC has now larger responsibility to respond and to react to it. I mean, you have to restore the legitimacy of this international system and credibility particularly of that whole system. So of course things are moving in a way, I mean, the way Israel is refuting, the way they're resisting to these orders, I guess it's the tone and the language particularly of the judges itself telling that they're getting frustrated. And period of time,
and
I
it's
guess
becoming
it gets more
hard to stick to what is, of course, not the reality and the real picture. Let me include Ayesha. Ayesha, we talk about, one of the main countries that we do have to consider when we talk about the situation, and the fact that, a country that's going to make the difference is the US. We're also looking at the response as far as some European countries are concerned, of course, Norway being one of them. And overall, as far as the US is concerned, do you think that the kind of reaction that has come, the refusal to respond to the arrest warrant, and then of course rejecting the arrest warrant, not commenting on the ICJ order overall, do you think that that itself shows a belligerence as far as the US is concerned? But then we've also seen the US judge at ICJ, Sarah Cleveland, who voted in favor of halting Israel's offensive in Rafah. So overall, do you think there's perhaps a chance that things can change as far as the closest ally of Israel is concerned?
So I think that the US's position in this and its reaction to both the ICJ ruling and to the ICC arrest warrants has been very interesting, especially when we take it into account in the sense of how the US reacted to Russia and Ukraine. So we had a ceasefire order from the ICJ, and there the US was very, very strongly saying that we condemn Russia for flouting ICJ orders. The ICJ orders are binding. It has to abide by them. Similarly, when we had the ICC arrest warrant against Putin for war crimes of deporting occupied children out of Ukraine, what did the U.S. say? The U.S. said, and President Biden said, that it was a justified arrest warrant. And here we look at the way Antony Blinken has replied to this. He has said that it was repugnant what they were doing, what the ICC was doing, that the ICC had no jurisdiction. The ICC jurisdiction in terms of Russia and Ukraine and in terms of Israel-Palestine is very, very similar. It has already decided it has jurisdiction. So to give such different responses to this based on who your allies are, show that you have a sense of hypocrisy, and that is losing you so much credibility on the world stage because all other countries are watching. And particularly when we look at European...
And exposing themselves in this manner. Let me include Dr. Waqas. Dr. Waqas, I think it's very, very important the way that the US is exposing itself, which is what I think Ayesha is also saying. The fact that, they're exposing their double standards, they're exposing the way that they're dealing with two similar situations at this time, and to the citizens of their own country. We've seen the rallies in Washington. We've seen people come out in a huge number all over the world, and that itself, I mean, you can't fool everyone forever, right?
So yeah, the state of Israel see US as one of the very close, in fact, the closest ally, but it also sort of put the United States in a difficult situation, that because a country with championing the human rights and the causes of individual liberty and freedom, it's very difficult, and it's not tenable to defend these all acts of violations, particularly what's happening in Gaza and overall in this crisis. Now, if you see the pressure within the US, civil society, academia and other, it's been kept on mounting because of the sort of a response that people were desiring, and people, particularly the civil society and academia, were looking there. It hasn't come from the Biden administration.
No, it hasn't.
But see, with the passage of time, we can see that now Biden is also in a difficult situation because he is dealing with an ally which is, particularly Netanyahu, is a very complex and difficult person, having a lot of political troubles inside within Knesset. I mean, he is prime minister just with the majority of 4 seats and went with the far right allies, Jewish supremacists, what we say them. So it's very difficult for them to engage with him. We see sort of over the period of time they're making statements, they're directly making statements to the Israelis citizen and leaving the government aside. But of course, this is a very, very big question on their fundamentals as well, one. And the second, I don't think so. The ICC, of course, if Israel was not the member of it, let's suppose, they have 124 countries, I guess. But if you say the court like ICJ, I mean, it's for the world order. It's for the international legal system. And US has been a champion of all these institutions and supporting the right of people, and of course, particularly when it comes to the countries. It's very difficult for United States to defend such measures, particularly if you see the level of destruction, starvation, blockade, and then you're not giving access for the medical aid. And see the response after the ICJ and ICC's decision, even the Israel continue doing all these the measures, and you see sending forces and doing all these violations. And cutting the supplies of the hospitals. This is difficult to defend.
It's difficult to defend, yes. But Ayesha, do you think even within the US, considering the Biden administration, their own domestic situation with regard to elections and all, do you think that can also play a part in a certain thawing, a certain change of stance with regard to this?
So I think it really comes down to the fact that Biden probably does not like Netanyahu that much. I know that the Biden administration has been very set against the Rafah offensive from the beginning. It is trying to erect that pier to let in humanitarian aid. It's really worried as well about how this makes it look. At the same time, the Israeli lobby in the U.S. is so strong that Biden knows he cannot get reelected or any hopes of a Democratic reelection unless he kowtows down to AIPAC and he kowtows down to the Israeli lobby. So really, in terms of domestic politics, they're the ones who have the chokehold. And as the IR theorist Mearsheimer says, Israel is the albatross currently around the U.S.'s neck. And I think we're just going to see how low it can bring the U.S. in the course of this onslaught on Gaza and on Rafah.
Pressure in terms of the kind of pressure from the people, the citizens overall. You don't think that the Biden administration is feeling that at all also?
So I think it is feeling it, especially because the optics of the college protests have been terrible for the Biden administration. It really has the Democrats usually can count on the youth vote, on young people to vote for it, and I think that they're probably going to perhaps leave the party in droves now, given what happened over the summer. At the same time, it cannot go against its donor base, and I feel like that's the main issue. The main issue is the funding and where that funding comes from, and it's not from the young people.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Let me come back to you. Dr. Waqas, as far as what's the options open at this time, we've also seen, there is overall, there is mediation efforts are also underway. Of course, the kind of attitude that we've seen as far as Israel is concerned, it seems that there is little hope for that. Do you agree?
See, in mediation, if we see the countries, particularly Qatar and then US
Egypt,
and many countries,
there's also
Egypt
US involvement,
has been the part of this these negotiations with both the Israeli officials and of course the Hamas. But the problem on the other side is that I guess there are a lot of the latest survey within Israel says that more than 56%, I guess, people surveyed, even those who voted for the party of Netanyahu, that they are in favor of release of hostages and then of course cessation of these military activities. But if you see the response of government is not like that. Particularly, I guess Netanyahu is trying to eye for the next elections and is trying to prove himself and come up as a savior for that entire community and the society. And I guess the broader politics within them and in this coalition particularly, and the people, those who are his allies, are I guess the major obstacle also. So on the other side, I guess there has to be, I mean, the peace constituencies, if you see over the period of time, has gone down. I mean, the spaces for them globally and particularly in that context has reduced. So of course, there is no alternative to negotiation. There is no alternative to have a dialogue and then come up with solution, at least to state solution which people are saying. And if even US has been saying on that, and particularly after the Norway and many other countries, if you see EU countries, particularly Spain.
I mean, one has to agree that overall, as far as the US is concerned, it is at the very least in an uncomfortable position, because the optics are clearly showing the reality of what's happening overall, and within itself also, you know, they are, you know, maybe of course, like Ayesha is saying, what matters is the donor base, so to speak, but inside also the voter base is certainly being affected. So there are these factors that are important also.
See, agree, but for the short term you might gain some interest, but if you see broader politics and the international order, these things and these trends particularly, and then if Israel try to portray that it's above the law, it's not welcoming, because world is already caught in a very protracted conflicts, east and west, everywhere. So the question is that this, of course, if you have these sort of standards where you can't implement and enforce these decisions, this itself challenges the world order. And the question is that how would you respond to this across the globe in a similar way, in a very justified way? This is one problem. The other which just I want to highlight is, if you see one important thing is that within this crisis, civil society has been, of course, one of the area which came up in the support of people of Palestine, of course, for their right cause. But if you see the US over the period of time, I guess their response towards this has been slowly and steadily. You have seen there is a slight change in that, because this also says that there is, of course, a lot of political pressure from its own allies. I mean, if you see the statements after the ICJ's decision from the very close ally of Israel,
yes,
they have been continuously asking for this implementation. They have to respect to it, because if you don't say that, the countries like France, they have their own values, civil liberties and individual freedom and all these things. It's very difficult for them to uphold these values within their own country. So I know this is quite challenging right now, because people want an emergency relief. This is an emergency, I mean, sort of court ruling, keeping the situation in backdrop. But if you keep on refuting and if you keep on resisting that, implementing those decisions, I guess later stage it can pave a way for the genocide as well, ruling on genocide as well. So this is, I guess, there is a bigger question, one on the international organizations, orders and institutions, particularly like UNSC now. The role of UNSC is very much important in this context. Countries, those who are allies to Israel, of course, they have to speak to them. They have to consistently speak and convince them that, look, the international order, the international, it's a world court. You have to respect to these rulings. And second, of course, for Israel, if you see that when the Spain and Norway and the one other island, I guess, they have accepted, I mean, the two states, so sort of given the Palestinian a state on 28th of May, they're going to do that. I mean, what was the response? That their ambassadors were called in Israel and they were showed videos over there about all that happened on 7th and then after that. And I guess there's a strong response from them that it's against diplomatic norms and ethos and value system. So this is the overall situation. Of course, there are local politics, there are domestic politics also, but of course the response and the overall attitude is not very welcoming.
Not very welcome. Ayesha, the role of the UNSC, as you know, Waqas is also saying, there's do you expect there to be, what is the realistic expectation following what has happened in your opinion? How far can they go in support?
So the UNSC is definitely going to be paralyzed by a US veto. I wouldn't really look to the Security Council as giving us much to hope for in this situation. Really what the General Assembly can do is, under the Uniting for Peace resolution, take this out of the UNSC and put it firmly within its remit and then order compliance with the ICC or with the ICJ. But really, no, the UNSC is not going to be a forum where we're going to have anything, because I doubt that Biden will turn on Netanyahu to such an extent that he will not use the veto. We saw that he didn't for a ceasefire, which was going to last 2 weeks. And then Netanyahu totally breached that ceasefire. He couldn't even maintain one for 2 weeks of Ramadan, and yet nothing was done about it.
So what is the realistic option moving forward for the people of Palestine who continue to suffer, in your opinion? What is the way forward? Is there any way forward?
So I would like to separate the people of Palestine also to those living in the West Bank and also to those living in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority has been ruling the West Bank and has really done an occupation of Palestine by Palestinians. It's really a subcontractor for the Israeli occupation. And they are actually the ones who are making the most out of this, because they're going to try and show that they are the ones who managed to get recognition for statehood. But it's really Hamas, which is kind of shown how incompetent the army has been. They claim to have taken over the north of Gaza, and now they have to go back and clear those areas again. They're not maintaining a stronghold. So if you listen to military experts, they're like, you've got to maintain a stronghold and then you've got to go and fight out of there. They're not. They don't seem to have a plan, and that is where Netanyahu is going to lose a lot of respect among the IDF. What is the hope for the day after this war ends? I have no idea. And I think we're going to see a reoccupation of Gaza, and I think we're going to see more brutal punishment of their people. And it's only going to change again with more resistance movement. I don't think negotiated hotels are going to achieve anything. I think it's going to have to be in the trenches.
You think, what about when we talk about third parties, or we talk about other countries, trying to play a role as far as amnesty is concerned? For example, they've emphasized the legal duty of third party states to prevent genocide and ensure that ICJ actually their measures are implemented. Do you think that there is, perhaps that can have any effect at all?
So we saw Nicaragua drag Germany to the ICJ, saying that they were complicit in the genocide. But Germany had a very, very strong defense. It said we have not actually sent any war weapons, hardly any war weapons, and we have not violated international law. The court there decided not to give any provisional measures. It said there's no risk here from what's happening. What that means is that the U.S. especially should probably look at that. I mean, I think it would have been very happy with that order because it meant nothing could affect it, but also the fact that you have given war weapons. So what does it mean for you that you don't have any of these defenses? So, yeah, I think that what is happening in domestic courts, especially we saw in the Dutch courts that they ruled that their state could not send F-35 fighter jets to Israel, and we're seeing such claims being brought in the UK and also in the US. Those domestic procedures should be triggered by the fact that the ICJ has now put you on public notice that there is a plausible genocide being committed in Gaza.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ayesha, for your very valuable input. Waqas, your last comments before I go to the other segment. Do you agree with Ayesha? You think there's little hope overall?
See, when it comes to UNSC, what I meant, of course, US has a very stated position on this, but to see the things in overall perspective, I mean, I hope and I still expect that because of a country that has its own record of human rights, they have to intervene and they have to create a certain environment where they can sort of more convince its ally that they have to abide by and respect the ICJ, and in future, I guess there has to be negotiated settlement of this. And I see, of course, many people are eyeing towards the next elections in Israel and maybe the change of government, and that could change the situation. But if you see, I mean, what Ayesha was saying that, I mean, after this, having this much destruction, I guess nothing is left to punish the Palestinian after this because of the overall scene, what has happened. I guess I still hope that the center voices might prevail. The countries will keep on pushing Israel, and particularly these allies in the Western countries having the values of democracy and the liberal values and the individual freedom and all that, they would keep pushing Israel. I guess it's not sustainable for so long to resist the international order, to resist your own allies for so long, because there are, of course, other than the military, you have the economic, financial and then of course the social consequences of it. And Israel, and over the period of time after this, if you keep on portraying yourself as an undemocratic, a non-democratic state, it's difficult to sustain with this image with your allies in the West.
Right, fair enough. Thank you so much, Dr. Waqas Ali Kausar. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to move on to the second part of our program, which is, of course, we've seen as far as the use of Afghan soil used as for terrorism within Pakistan. We've seen the recent events. We've also seen the presser from the Interior Minister, also the intelligence-based operations in Hassan Khail, Peshawar, and of course the Prime Minister's and overall the government's commitment to eradicating terrorism. With a view to that, we have with us Brigadier Waqar Khan. Thank you for joining us, Brigadier Saab. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Brigadier Saab, this, for a while, I mean, one has to say that this is, of course, these recent events are right there, but the way that the Afghan soil has been used is something that has been happening for a while. What do you assess the latest situation and, of course, the reaction that we've seen?
I think if you look at the commitment of Pakistan's political military leadership, especially in the last 2 years, as far as terrorism is concerned, there's going to be red line, and most probably, I think as was announced even by the Interior Minister today, that 2024 will be a decisive year. So if you look at the fighting now, even today we had shahadat of a captain and a havaldar. On the other side, there were more casualties for the terrorists. I want to actually highlight one important factor is the difference that we have to keep in mind between the people of Afghanistan and the Taliban government, because that's very important. That message has to be communicated to the people. Afghanistan comprises about 41 million people, which is a very large number, and 40% are today, are deficient in terms of food. There's food insecurity for 40%, and I think a lot of them are children and women. The economy is in a very bad shape. It has gone into minus 0.6% this year. And if you look at the floods and the way Taliban were managing it, I think things are out of control. And there's definitely call within Afghanistan. You can't manage 41 million people through terrorism and suppression. So that's why Pakistan keeps the humanitarian angle and engagement on one side and still asking or pressurizing or communicating to Taliban that terrorism will not work. I think Taliban too government came and they thought that they could still use terrorism as a tool of policy and draw concessions, maybe economic concessions to blackmail, which has not worked because Pakistan has come very straight that in case you are the younger brother, we can't afford. The younger brother keeps slapping the elder brother, and then you expect that we should keep smiling. So a clear-cut policy was adopted. So I think they have to make a choice, and gradually you'll find that the Afghan Taliban will, I think, come to the negotiating table as far as terrorism in Pakistan is concerned. So I think the pressure on the government has to continue. Now there's a regional voice coming in. We have discussed it earlier, even Moscow format last year. Everybody, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, Central Asia, asked them to shut these terrorist factories. Then you had attack in Moscow. So I think now it's becoming an international pariah state. But also we see 41 million Afghans suffering. If you look at all the, I think, indicators of economy, development, social development, women development, they're all minus. So I think this is something they have to realize that things cannot go on like that.
Let me go to Dr. Waqas. Dr. Waqas, you heard what Brigadier Saab is saying. As far as Afghanistan is concerned, the dilapidated state themselves, of course, overall economy, all of that. How do you, I mean, of course, this can't continue for the Afghani people, of course, and there is, I think Brigadier Saab is very right to draw the distinction. But as far as the government itself is concerned, do you think there is this inability to be able to deal with the kind of terrorism that is coming from there also, some of it?
Yeah, I guess two important things are there. One, of course, I mean, there's doing a practical administration and doing ruling and doing governance in a country which has been a part of a long war. I guess the current regime over there has to understand that the governance and the administration and all these things are quite entirely different ballgame than to fighting a war. One. And second, of course, once you want to become the part of international community and the committee, you have to respect the norms and ethics and the international order and the rule. Sadly, I mean, I guess the people and the government and the groups over the period of time learn from their experiences. But I guess there is a lot of need for the current regime over there to learn from the past experiences and try to build their society which is internationally acceptable. You have to create spaces for the women, you have to create spaces for your civil society, you have to work in a very professional way, and you have to create certain systems where you can work with the world and you can have a reasonable, justifiable presence and acceptability in the world.
To expect that from
now,
the kind of place
then of course there are challenges to it. I mean, Pakistan is one of the victims of the terrorism. If you see that post 2001, and if you see, I mean, our economy, our tourism, our governance, every I mean aspect and the sector of our society has literally been suffered and damaged due to this terrorism thing. And I guess part of it, we need to understand that Afghanistan and overall their wars and their crises, I mean, that has been deeply linked with us, and that's that they need to understand that Pakistan has also hosted huge number of people from there, Afghan migrants as well. Now, I guess this is the responsibility of the people, those are in control in Afghanistan, that they have to have a very strong and clear policy that there is, of course, there is certain limit to everything.
But do you think it's inability, or do you think it's just, you know, to prevent that kind of terrorism?
I guess I personally think that there could be both things. I mean, inability in a way that they don't have the governance experience. They should understand that they need to have very good sort of a collaborative way of learning from Pakistan's experiences, and then Pakistan was always extended its hand to support in economy and in other things. But if your attitude and if you keep on supporting the groups which are inflicting terrorism on Pakistan and Pakistan's national interest, this is something acceptable for Pakistan. Unacceptable for Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan has been, I mean, long. If you see that,
we've been very lenient in that sense, and we've.
And I guess there's a time that we need to be very clear that there is zero tolerance on cross-border terrorism from our side.
I think the government is quite clear about that. We heard the press conference today, Prime Minister also, Interior Minister overall. I have with me Sarfaraz Ahmed Rana, who's a security analyst. Sarfaraz sahab, can you hear me?
You are audible. Thank you.
Sarfaraz, we're talking about, you know, this recent spate of terrorism also, and overall, you know, the kind of that's coming, Afghan soil being used, the evidence of it overall. To what do you attribute this kind of? Do you think it's we don't have a response from the Afghan government as such at this time? We also know that, you know, the state of the people there, the state of Afghanistan as a whole, I think Brigadier Sahab highlighted that. To what end do you see this, you know, as for the Afghani people also?
You know, the only thing currently they have, that is the violence in their hand, and I think Pakistan should not be wasting the time thinking of that, you know, Afghan, especially this current Afghan regime, which is a de facto regime, which is not legitimate, right? That they should, you know, come in the defense of Pakistan. It is Pakistan that has to protect its own national security, and Pakistan has to have the, you know, that kind of thing. Number one. Number two, you know, that is the important thing, that Pakistan certainly need to have a strategic clarity. Why? Because all borders of Pakistan currently, we face kind of, you know, problem with Iran and problem with all the sides, including Afghanistan, right? First of all, Pakistan need to put its own house in order, number one. Number two, political stability is very important element of that thing. Political stability is very important. The second thing is, of course, you know, that economic side must be, Pakistan should have some economic plan that, you know, Pakistan can bring its own house in order. Number three. Number four, Pakistan has to set some of the foreign policy preferences and priorities, that what Pakistan is going to do in the next 5 years, right? That is, of course, in line with the first point, which I've said, you know, in which I mentioned about the strategic clarity Pakistan need to have in place. So these are the important things. If Pakistan does not have the strategic clarity, Pakistan does not have the political stability, house in order, economic, you know, stability, and Pakistan has been, you know, going on like this, the way we have, like status quo. So then, of course, you know, why? Because these are all the fault lines. and Pakistan has immediately to address all this.
Let me include Brigadier Sahab, if you heard what Sarfaraz Ahmed Sahab is saying, there's clearly, I mean, as far as clarity is concerned, I think there's no doubt that Pakistan is clear that it will not let Afghan soil be used for terrorism, for Pakistan. We are also clear that, as far as our forces are concerned overall, our securities are concerned, they're more than able to deal with the terrorism that's coming from there. And of course, we have for a while we made it clear to the Afghan government that we will not tolerate it. But of course now the policy will become perhaps stricter in that sense.
Yeah, I think although there are certain important things that were highlighted by Mr. Sarfaraz, but I think we discussed earlier that Pakistan and Afghanistan don't live in a bubble. Which is isolated from the international power play. Just to remind that in the last 40 years, there were two superpowers who came not on invitation of Pakistan and occupied it physically, 8 years for the Russians, almost 2 decades for the Americans. So there were 5 regime changes in Afghanistan in past, I think, 20, 25 years, very violent regime change. So it remains unstable. And if you go back 300 years, there were 80 or 100 wars in Afghanistan. So unfortunately, it is an unstable region. And we have to actually deal with it. So in terms of policy, I think every government has tried to deal with the people who are sitting in Kabul, and that's what we are also doing. Current, I think, political community leadership is quite clear. As far as terrorism is concerned, there are, of course, issues related to connectivity. Like today, I think press conference was very important, in which Interior Minister very clearly highlighted the Afghan hand, the Taliban hand in supporting TTP and attack on the Chinese, because China is a common friend. If there is the CPAC, there are, I think, developmental project going on in Afghanistan. China has invested very heavily. So, and I think now Chinese are also understanding. So that's how I think strategy should be, that you involve the regional power players and communicate it to Afghanistan. It can't be kosher to, attack Chinese interests through their proxies. Or maybe India was behind it because Indians are now very keen to get back into Afghanistan and keep the Pak-1 border on fire. So there are dynamics. Unfortunately, this is I would say, a tough region to bend or to let's say run a foreign policy. But I think governments are very clear. And if you look at terrorism, look at the amount of sacrifices by all law enforcement agencies, police, frontier corps, civilians, military, intelligence. There is a list every day. We are sacrificing brave sons for defending Pakistan. But now there's a determination, and inshallah it will be. And I've been talking of those 7-8 leverages that we can apply very intelligently against the Afghan government sitting in Kabul. It's a Afghan transit rate, it's food, it's the transit of almost 3 lakh or 300,000 Afghans travel every month to Pakistan for different reasons. So same as then the Afghan refugees here. Illegals are being sent back, I think was pointed out by the Interior Minister. So these are, I think, some of the things. But unfortunately, we also have to look at Afghan people. As I mentioned, women, children, they are suffering. And this year it's going to be very tough because there is a severe food shortage. These are reports by United Nations, not my own calculation. So all told, I think we are moving on a correct trajectory. And I'm sure if you put all these pressures on the Taliban government, Pakistan can draw results, and we can coexist, as friendly countries.
Of course. Waqas, do you agree with what Brigadier Sahab is saying? As far as, of course, the people of Afghanistan, of course, we have to consider the women and children there. But as far as combating or dealing with terrorism there, do you think Afghan government can afford to do this, really, considering the situation that they're in?
See, I would like to go on another aspect to it, that I mean, given the situation, I mean, Pakistan keep conveying the international world that the way it suffered, and now particularly the post-US exit, the way it has suffered. And then the international organizations, and particularly United Nations report, also one way or the other way indicates the presence and the consolidation of the terrorist sanctuaries like ISIL and the other. I mean, this is now not a threat to the Pakistan only. This is again a threat to the regions and then the larger, the region peripheries. I guess there is dire need to have a dialogue and also initiate a process where we can engage the international community to make them understand that, look, this is not about the one country. It's of course the potential and then their presence, and the agenda particularly is not towards the only Pakistan, but it has a global ramification and impact. So I guess Pakistan need to speak once again, talk, and it's been engaging their own allies, and I guess there's a need to have a support from international community to combat such sort of challenges. And of course, for Afghan Taliban, I must say, I mean, there are not very high hopes that they could do all these things. I mean, there's a politics involved, there are internal rifts involved, there are many things, and particularly if you don't have that much governance experience, and then the niche, particularly your niche is the violence, and then you keep thriving on that. I guess this is a high time, and they should realize, and they need to realize that there is a time they have to do the course correction. The people of Afghanistan, I mean Pakistan, and the relation between people of Afghanistan and Pakistan has been commendable. I mean, there have been greater, deeper ties made with social and other economic ties as well. But of course, this element particularly, these two can't go side by side.
Yes, of
so
course.
there is a need to understand that, and I guess the center rises within Afghanistan, and particularly those living abroad also need to understand that Pakistan and Afghanistan deeply interconnected due to many historical
and
other
with the
reasons.
kind of attack that we've seen as far as the
And
Chinese are concerned.
That's what I'm saying. See, this seems to be a more than from Pakistan's angle. It's quite strategic in nature, targeting Chinese, and then the international and many international. I mean, the organizations, many international offices, and many offices and institutions have been targeted here with the view that this has a global and a larger strategy and planning in that. I guess the world need to understand once again that they can't afford to have this region unstable again.
Exactly, and its importance overall for the world is quite paramount.
That's what I'm saying, and if I mean, if the countries hostile to Pakistan try to take advantage of this situation, this is not in their favor for so long, because the experiences tell that these constituencies which thrive on violence keep doing violence over the period of time, and we have seen that, we have witnessed in our own countries, and it's not that they don't respect the borders, and particularly in past, if you see that the experiences that Pakistan had, we made our national action plan, we have created lot of infrastructure that can resist militarily and socially and politically to terrorism. I guess there is one more need to it, that Pakistan's internal political stability and then resolve, and of course the civil society and the people, I guess, should take a lead. Besides military, of course, military is resisting, and the civil law enforcement agencies and all other are giving their lives. But of course, there's a very, very urgent need that how our society should respond to it, and they should respond in a very forceful manner. That, look, this is something which is unacceptable for Pakistan. Pakistan has long suffered due to this terrorism crisis, and now there is no need, and there's no space for such actions. And last, just particularly one thing I want to mention, that Afghanistans and people of Afghanistan have to decide one thing. In 21st century, you can't thrive on these old traditional ways of governance and violence and all these things. You have the population, you have to nurture them, you have to educate them, you have to give them space, you have to build your own economy, and then your economy and these proxies can't go together.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you for joining us, Brigadier Waqar Khan. Thank you for being with us, Sarfaraz, Ahmed, Rana, and of course Dr. Waqas Ali Kausar. Thank you so much for your time. Overall, as far as the situation at this time is concerned, Pakistan remains committed to ensuring that its borders are safe and that no country and their soil is used to perpetrate terrorism within Pakistan. There are no two opinions on that. Of course, the military, the security forces overall are fully aware of the situation and fully able to deal with any and all threats coming from anywhere. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.